Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the Beehive. David, it's going well. How's it going?
It's going great, man. Thank you so much. Very excited for today's session.
It is what, second to the last of the series, right?
Yep.
And we're really going to be driving a conversation today, really about building and automating and um, driving feature engineering, as you kind of spoke about, around predictive modeling. And I know I asked you about what does feature engineering mean. So I'm excited to hear you kind of articulate that to folks and things like that. So the folks that are new to this, hey, this is the first time we are streaming live into LinkedIn at the same time. We've been streaming live to YouTube for a while now. So now we're bringing the power of two social platforms together to bring the workshop around Slate, around all the innovative things around admissions that David really drives towards. So excited about that. So the folks that are new to us, you are welcome to join the stage. If you want to join the stage, go ahead and let us know in the chat. If you're in LinkedIn or YouTube, we may send you an invite to come to the backstage through that link. But for everyone else, I would say, join us on through the StreamYard part, and then we'll just ask us if you want to come up, or if you're putting a question, we may ask you to come up and just join us. We just ask you to turn on your camera and come on stage. We're really excited about the conversation we're having today. So your voice really matters. And so that's an important part of how the Beehive works. We really want an engagement that is allowing you to talk about the things that you need to be talking about, and then allowing you to really drive a conversation. I'm not going to take too much time, but you know, when we think about building, just predictive modeling and building it and creating automation, David, I always like to set the table for the people that aren't in admissions, that are in different places. Why do that? Why is predictive modeling really important? And what is the element of building it? And what are the elements of automation? And notice I kind of hold off on the feature engineering piece, because I think that is what you call the Jedi kind of thing. So I'm going to let you talk about it there. But give the audience that is new to this a little bit about what predictive modeling is, why it's so important. I'm a big believer that the future of higher ed is all about proactive as opposed to reactive, right? Higher ed is built on a very reactive model. The proactiveness is going to be an important piece. So give us a little bit about that, and then take it away with your slides. And you notice I'll always chime in.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Yeah, and I really think that that's a really important conversation right now. As you say, a lot of times it's easier to be reactive, and institutions are trying to put out fires or catch up from behind. And one of the great things about predictive modeling is it allows us to understand how likely someone is to apply our institution, or how likely a student is to enroll. But this extends well beyond admissions. Admissions is kind of the lens we use for a lot of these workshops, but whether or not a student is retained, or they're going to graduate, or engaging with alumni on prospective donations, stuff like that. It really allows us to be much more data driven. And the type of modeling I like to do, and the benefit of automating it in a CRM like Slate, is you can start adding that strategic, proactive, prescriptive touch to your modeling. So like, oh, if we can get them to come to our admitted student day, this student's going to be 4% more likely to enroll, or we'll get 4 extra students in our incoming class, and that'll adjust our net tuition revenue up by $100,000. So we can really start taking the predictive model and being proactive with it. And we'll talk a bit about that today. So yeah, if we want to hop over to the slides, we will hop right into it. So hello, everyone, and welcome to, like Matt said, this is the second to last one, the 5th out of 6 workshops powered by Beyond Academics. In this 6-part series, we've been working our way through strategically building, implementing, and actually using Slate, or another CRM system, to automatically score and apply predictive modeling to your records. I've already presented on scoring and modeling at places like Slate Summit and AACRO-SIM. But these sessions are much more detailed resources that you can actually build along with. So my name is David Dysart. I am the Director of Data and Functional Systems Design here at Beyond Academics. I've worked in institutional research and the Office of Admissions at large public institutions, small liberal arts colleges, respectively. Also spent a bit of time outside of higher ed, but I am really happy to have refound my home in higher education, and especially happy to be here with you today. Beyond Academics serves as operating partners to institutions committed to becoming and remaining future ready. So today we're going to choose our systems to actually build our predictive model. A little bit of information about predictive modeling, but we'll go more into detail next month with that. We're also going to talk about how you can actually automate these models in Slate or other CRM systems. And we're probably going to spend about half of our time working in actual Slate, doing configurable joins for that feature engineering piece. That's what I'm really excited about. We're going to build predictor variables that aren't just, oh, how many times did the student come to our campus? But we're looking much more in depth of, did the student set up an event right after being admitted or getting their financial aid award? So we're looking at how students are engaging with our institution in a way that might be more indicative of if they intend to enroll. One of the fun things we've been doing this month is we released this little Slate data miner, and I asked the community, both on LinkedIn and the Facebook group, what I should name them. So at the end of today's session, we'll reveal the name and the Slate community member who submitted, I think, a really wonderful name. So for the actual modeling itself, we are going to choose a statistics software as kind of the first decision you'll be making. A system like R can be really great. It's a free software system that's open. People build packages for it. You can use it to build predictive models, machine learning algorithms. It kind of need to learn Python and the R language to build the actual scripts to run your models. But it does have packages, like I said, like Carrot, that help with building the machine learning algorithms. A lot of times, folks at your institution that might be helping you with the project, maybe those are folks in institutional research or faculty trained in statistics, are going to have a lot of experience and maybe an institution license for SPSS. So that's what we're going to be using in this workshop. We'll go into more detail about the kind of nuts and bolts next month in our binary logistic regression workshop, but we just wanted to kind of briefly touch on some of these concepts today. We can also do other systems like Excel or Slate to do your data exploration and data cleaning. And I'll demonstrate an Excel document that I have that I found very helpful for building these models next month. So the next option is choosing the type of model. So this could be a machine learning algorithm like a decision tree or neural networks. Those are a bit more resource intensive and kind of fall on that scale of how interpretable and explanatory they can be. So for this workshop, we're going to be using something called binary logistic regression. So this is a predictive model, and I like this for a few different reasons. It's very simple to run in Slate. So we're going to actually have a Slate query run our predictive model on our student records automatically, and a source format's going to come and pick it up. So you don't have to be running your model in a separate system and building a data integration or a data bridge to add your actual data to Slate. So it's a relatively simple model to build and to automate. And it also has what we were talking about, that prescriptive element to it. Because the math is relatively simple, we can actually start tweaking the model behavior. So like, oh, we know later on in the cycle, they're going to, maybe 30% of our students will attend our admitted student day. And we know generally what that impact is for our students. So we can, in Slate reports, actually model how likely our students are to apply today, but also after that admitted student day. And we can really start seeing how those cycle changes are expected to impact our head counts, net tuition revenue, pieces like that, but also our strategic and prescriptive nudges. Okay, maybe we're not scheduled to hit our goals for head count. So maybe we add some kind of academic preparedness programming, or we send some additional emails. We can again start modeling how likely students are to apply on an individual basis, but as that broader incoming class, based on these strategic nudges. So I just have up here on the stage, up here on the screen, this beacon structural. It's just um, a shorthand for behavioral engagement and analyticals for communication outreach nexus. So it's just using these predictive models to build a strategy around your student journey and your communication framework. We went over a lot of this last month in our kind of how to use these models in your strategic recruitment and communications, which is recorded. And it really goes into a lot of things, not only in the automation piece of like, okay, we're going to send these emails to our highly engaged students, or we're going to tailor our calls to actions to these highly engaged, high likelihood to enroll students. But also you can start prioritizing. If you have thousands of students in your funnel, you can't make calls, you can't do these really high cost, high resource touches. But if you know you have 15 students that might benefit from that, that are going to be high impact. Hey, Matt.
Hey, really quick. So, David, is this a framework that you would use? You know, when we are doing our planning with our clients, we put things into like some sort of project plan, some sort of framework. Would you kind of do this as a campaign concept? Like when you're saying, hey, follow, is there like a set of questions on behavioral, and then based on that behavioral, these are the engagements, and based on that, these are analytics you're looking for? Like, can you give me a little bit of is it a framework, a methodology? Is it just some roadmap that you kind of simplify the following of in this acronym?
Yeah, so it kind of falls between somewhere of that framework and roadmap to start building that more strategic outreach piece. And it kind of falls in line with like, okay, we have our strategic enrollment management plan of where we're going as an institution, but we need the data to be able to drive those nudges, those more strategic outreach pieces. So I don't have a document really that lays out the framework more than just I wanted to make sure that we kind of touched on it here today.
Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something that we should build for the community. Maybe we should give them some sort of almost like a methodology to follow these steps. Because I think part of this is they may do one thing, but they may forget the second element of it, right? And sure,
Yeah,
the Beacon acronym may drive them there, but I also think there might be some best practices on each one of these too, right? That I think
definitely.
we should be able to build something for the community that way. So, okay.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, I'll definitely work on that and we can get that out to the community. So when it comes to actually automating your model in your CRM, we'll be using Slate for these workshops. If you are using another system, you just want to make sure that it can automate either a data export import like Slate does, or some kind of automation or role process. Slate kind of has a light version of SQL it uses for its configurable joins export. So it should have some kind of functionality like that. Like I said, the math is not very complicated or computationally intensive to run a binary logistic regression, but you do need some flexibility to create it. And we'll go over that in a little bit. So after you've built your model in a system like SPSS, you're going to program the math into your actual configurable joins exports. So we'll pull up our instance of Slate here. We have a few tabs we'll go over today. So this process will take a few different queries, kind of, I don't want to say daisy chained one after another, but we're going to automate multiple queries to get you that this student is a 0 to 100% likelihood to apply or to enroll. And just like the usual asterisk, that probability is only going to be as good as your predictive model is. So if you aren't using great variables, or you're not using variables in a way that are actually impactful to prediction, your actual 0 to 100% might be off. But we have our query that we use to both build our training data. And training data is your historical data, so maybe data from the last 3 to 5 years that you're analyzing to build your predictive model to apply to current and future students. So this query here is both building it for our training data, but it's also calculating our behaviors, which we're going to, again, automate and write into Slate specific fields. So we want to know how many times maybe the email sent us from the student or how many events they attended. While the actual model is not very computationally expensive, we do want to break this up into multiple queries just so that it's a little bit easier for Slate to run. So once we build our training model off of our training data, our historical data from previous admission cycles, we will actually use the model and build that into Slate. And we can just pop over here into this. And this is literally what the model looks like. Like I said, it's not a very complicated when you're dealing with something like binary logistic regression. And we're actually going to automate this. So we can go into schedule export. And this pop-up window gives you a lot of different options. We covered a lot of this in our first workshop with engagement scoring, so we won't spend too much time here. But Slate's going to drop it into your institution-specific SFTP server. So this is specific to your institution. Other colleges can't get to it. By default, it drops it into the outgoing folder. There's a nice little trick if you use 2 dots, a /, and incoming. That tells Slate that you actually want to send it to your incoming folder, which the source formats will look at to pick up data coming into your institution. And you just give it a really specific name. You can timestamp it if you want with these variables as like a nice handy dandy guide. I'd probably recommend getting email notifications if the query fails or if there's a late delivery. Again, because we are staggering these different queries, if one of the earlier queries runs late, it could throw off your percentages. And if you need this data updated daily, you can do that. Typically, you might find that updating it once a week is enough to ingest any new events that students might have attended. You can also manually just run these and then re-upload them if you want updated data at time of decision committee. But this is just the automation piece, so we're just updating it over the weekend during these slower windows where not as many people are doing things either at your institution or the neighbors on your node who might also be using the same server resources. But then we can, after we've had Slate drop it to our SFTP server, we can just have a source format, actually automate the process to pick the data up, write it into the Slate fields, and then you can have up-to-date active reports, queries, recipient lists that have all updated to reflect the new behaviors, new events they've attended, new emails, new logins, whatever your behavioral data is. To active, again, a notification email to email you to say that, oh, this source format didn't pick up correctly. You should go investigate. Our file format has a header. Import automations. So this is the name of the file that it's looking for in your SFTP server. And we're using this asterisk as a wildcard. So if you are adding those timestamp variables, this will pick up any file in your SFTP server that says enroll_behaviors, and then any characters at all, and then just the file type. One word of caution is definitely be careful what you're naming your queries, because if you have multiple queries that start with enroll_behaviors, this one source format will pick them both up and try to ingest them. And if you've only mapped one set of file fields, then your subsequent files aren't going to run and map correctly. So definitely have separate source formats for each of your queries, and then be just really specific with how you name them in your schedule exports, because this is what it's looking for here. Like I said, we covered a lot of the more technical details in our first workshop, which is also recorded. So I think we can move on to what I think is the most exciting part of this workshop, which is feature engineering. So we're going to actually get into Slate. We're going to be building variables that might be very impactful for your institution as indicators of if a student will apply, enroll, be retained, whatever your office needs are that you're actually using these models for. And I just have this as an example of, this is the data that we pull from our SPSS output. As we went over a few minutes ago, you're pulling these values into your subquery export formula. And these are just unstandardized regression coefficients. Again, not a name you need to memorize now. But this is essentially as these values go up one, the odds ratio of your outcome of if they're going to apply or if they're going to enroll goes up or down by this specific amount. And our constant here is just before we start looking at our behaviors, what is essentially a student value. So we're just going to hop back over to our instance of Slate. And we're going to go over a few different exports here. And these are just kind of different ways to look at the data. You can do more straightforward, like how many events did the student attend, or a yes, no flag. We're going to be looking at slightly more complicated fields today. Nothing too wild or crazy, but just kind of that mid-level step up of what is possible in configurable joins and what is possible with some of your variables. So, and if I'm going too fast or if anyone has any questions, please drop it in the chat. Happy to chat or bring some folks up to talk about these formulas. There is probably a very broad spectrum of comfort levels with configurable joins on the call today. So we'll just kind of go through these. We're not going to build them from scratch like we did a couple workshops ago, but I want to make sure that we kind of touch on some of the possibilities with configurable joins.
Hey, David, when there is an audience, say people in the participants, and they're not comfortable with, the tech side of it, is it better just to reach out to the IT side of their campus, or is YouTube, or is there other resources that, you can learn on your own? Which direction should these folks really think about when they're not as savvy? Because I'm more functional, but YouTube does me wonders when I need to find something. What's your suggestion on that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great resources, both from Technolutions and from preferred partners like us, like the other preferred partners. There's a lot of webinars, community conversations happening every week. Some vendors have recorded sessions on configurable joins. I know when I was on the institution side, our IT department wasn't really in Slate, so they weren't necessarily a resource for us on the configurable joins, but they do have a lot of the same kind of foundational knowledge. Configurable joins is very much a drag and drop user interface to build in SQL, essentially. So you're not having to hand code things, but you're joining different data tables. So becoming more familiar with SQL and relational databases will also help. Playing around with it, it's easy to join to different data tables in a way that isn't going to give you the data that you want. So it's really important to, as you're learning configurable joins and as you're building reports, to also try to replicate it in either the local or Slate template library or in more straightforward ways so that so there's definitely a lot of resources at the institution level that might be able to help you with some of the technical points, even if they don't have as much hands-on experience with a tool like configurable joins. But there are also tons of resources, the Facebook group, the Slack channel, the community forums. There's all these places to be asking questions or watching other people ask and answer questions that, like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Let me go play around with that in my instance of Slate. So there's a lot of different types of resources. Slate Summit, a lot of vendors also have like attach on conferences before Slate Summit or standalone ones. So there's just so many different ways to interact with Slate and trainings around it.
Okay, really quick,
Yeah.
just some logistics. Cody said your Slate screen's a little blurry. I may agree with him. I tried to see it. It looks a little blurry. Is there something you can do with that? If not,
Maybe refresh
we'll.
it.
Yeah.
I'll refresh it and then I'll try zooming in a bit. Maybe that will.
Thank you, Cody.
Yeah, thank you, Cody. Okay, hopefully that's a little bit better. So we'll talk about a few different ways to kind of look at our data. So we're looking at a yes, no flag, essentially, of if they attended an event. And this could be an in-person, like a campus tour, interview, information session. This could be looking at recruitment travel. Maybe this is college fairs, high school visits, could be virtual events, maybe you host live or recorded virtual events for students to attend. These different types of events are probably going to have a different relationship with how likely a student is to apply or enroll. So most of the time it's going to be recommended to kind of disaggregate those different types of events. But with something like binary logistic regression, we do have to have essentially a linear relationship between our predictor variables, like attending events on campus, and our outcome of like applying or enrolling. There are some tricks and transformations you can do, but if you are automating this in Slate, anything that you're transforming your data to build your model, you're going to have to replicate in Slate. So that gets much more tricky. So there's a lot to balance there of, okay, I can be more powerful, but I lose the ability to automate in Slate. So depending on your institutional needs and your resources to run the model internally or externally, kind of all factors into your feature engineering and selecting a model. So because you have what is relatively a linear relationship between your predictors, the effects or the relationship that someone has from going from 0 events to 1 event might be much larger than someone who just like, oh, I also did a campus tour and an interview while I was on campus. So forcing that data in kind of a straight line might not work as well. So this particular variable is just a yes, no flag if they attended an event at all, because that might be where you're seeing your biggest change. So we have our application base for our query. We're joining to person. We're joining from person to form responses. So this is anytime a student submits a form response, like your RFI, an event registration, an interview registration. So we're also going to join from that form response table to the associated form table. And that's where we can start specifying, I only want to look at a specific type of event. We can see here in the template, we're only looking at like on-campus events, or I want to look only at events that are in the Slate a specific Slate folder. And we can also look at, we want to make sure that these are events that the student has actually attended. Someone no showing an event or someone who is registered for a future event is not going to have the same effects as someone who has actually attended the event. And depending on the actual use of your model, most of the use cases we're dealing with in this workshop is at time of decision committee, predicting headcount at time of census. So when we're looking at how likely a student is to enroll, both from our training data and both for the training data and actually applying it to students who are at time of decision committee, we're only interested in events that have happened before decisions were made. Because someone who's enrolling could be going to an admit student day. They might choose to attend the campus event again. So that's not going to be relevant to how likely a student is to apply, how likely a student is to enroll at time of decisions, or how likely a student is to apply at the application deadline. So we're looking at just event attendances. So we're looking for start date and time, so that's when the actual event happened, before our admission decision was confirmed. Then we could do released or opened, whatever fits your institution practices. So only counting was committed before decisions that they actually attended and in these specific templates and folders. And if there are any of those events, we're going to give that student a 1. If there are none, we just give them a 0. And we could also change this to our aggregate output and count the number of times. So if they went to 3 events, we can count 3. If they went to 0, it would just be 0. And this could also be, again, split up even more. If you wanted to know how many events the student attended on different days, we can add filters to look for events that were happening on different days from each other. Because again, you're probably going to get a slightly higher intention to enroll if they're coming to campus on multiple days rather than just attending multiple convenient events at the same day. So we can hop out of that one. But what might be more important is looking at how a student decides to attend an event in relation to something that the institution does. So maybe the institution is admitting the student or sending them their transfer evaluation or sending them their financial aid award information. If a student stops sending emails or stops going to events, that might be indicative. But what about students who okay, they get that decision, and then within that week, they decide to sign up for an event? That, again, might show that they are more likely to enroll, or maybe they're reaching out to a counselor to have a phone call or filing an appeal with financial aid office. So in this particular export, again, we're just going to look, if they signed up for an event, we're going to give them a 1. If no event, a 0. This is just a little bit easier for SPSS to use than a yes or a no. Again, we're looking at in-person events, in this case, interviews. And we're looking at an event registered within our admit opened. So we're going to look at when the decision was opened. So again, this is an admit decision. And when they submitted their form event request. And we're looking at this date difference formula. So this just tells you the amount of time between 2 dates. We're specifying we want the number of days. So the number of days between the admit was opened and the form response was submitted. So when they registered for the event. If this was negative, you would get negative. If it's positive, you get positive. And then we're just using a formula filter. So we don't use a case when and an if and a then, an else. So it's just if that number of days is greater than or equal to 0 or less than or equal to 7. So essentially, did they register for an event within a week of opening their admit decision? Then we use that as a filter. And if that's the case, then we give them a 1. If not, we give them a 0. So again, if institutions are interacting, if the students are interacting with your institution during these moments that matter, that might be more indicative than just if they registered for an event at some point in the cycle. And we can look at a few more of these kind of timestamp behaviors. We're looking again at the date difference in the number of days from when they had an event and when they actually submitted their application. So if they did a campus tour and they're like, oh my gosh, the next day they submit an application, these could be really good indicators on if they decide to enroll. So we're looking at not only this number of days, because this could be 400 days. This could be some large amount of time. So we're adding another filter that is the same thing. If this is greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 7, so if it happens within that week of them attending the event that they apply, then we're going to make them eligible to show the number of days, which would be 0 to 7. So again, we're just looking at these different ways that students are engaging with us during these really big moments. And we can do similar things of when did the application open? A lot of times an institution will do it like August 1st. And we're using a formula to just look at the last 4 digits of your round name. So if you have like a regular decision, 2024, transfer, 2025, we're looking at the last 4 digits to create that year. So you're not having to update this query every cycle or every year, calendar year. This will just automatically update in that August 1st window. And if you have different opening dates for different rounds, you can add a coalesce formula to, if they're a regular decision, use August 1st. If they're a spring transfer, use October 1st, whatever it might be. So we're generating this application open date automatically. And we're looking at the application submitted date. So how soon after the application opens are they submitting their application? There could be a lot more noise with a variable like this. Higher socioeconomic status tend to submit applications earlier in the process. Certain populations tend to submit the applications later in the cycle. So you are going to get a lot more noise in a variable like this, just as a word of caution. Same thing with looking at how long did it take the student to complete their application. So we're looking at the date that they submitted their application. And we're looking at when they went from awaiting materials to awaiting decision. We're looking for that awaiting run. So if they completed their application and maybe we found out like, oh, this material was not correct, we have to push them back into awaiting materials. And then they completed again. So how many days did it take them to submit their application, to completing their application? Again, we're going to get more noise here. There are going to be certain populations that have to submit more materials. Again, a high school might be sending transcripts faster in some areas than others. But this is just an idea to show some of the possibilities when looking at your data in Slate. And we look at more direct behaviors. So we're looking at the number of times the student logged into your portal. And we can just dig into this one a little bit further. So we're tracking, again, the number of times they logged into their portal. And this could be your applicant status page. If you've created a custom portal, we might need to specify which portal before the admit decision was released. Slate's also going to track the number of times the student logged in, but also the number of times staff impersonated the login. So we just need to add that login type filter to be direct logins. And we're using that aggregate count function to count how many times. Because there is that linear relationship from like 0 to maybe a student logged in 65 times. And we're going to start skewing our data, and we could maybe handle that as an outlier, but our current and upcoming students are still going to maybe be logging in 65 times. But what you might find when you're starting to explore the data is students who logged in more than 5 times look very similar to a student who logged in 5 times. So we're using this formula of just looking for when this count is greater than 5, just tell me 5. And if it's not greater than 5, then just return the actual value. There are lots of asterisks and rules of thumbs about limiting your data, but data exploration could definitely show some of these trends that are helpful for building these variables. And maybe we're looking at the messages sent by the student. So we're also looking if they sent more than 5 emails, then just give us the value of 5. When looking at the messages data table, there's a lot that goes into it. So we're going to add a few additional filters. The method we want to restrict to just emails. There's a lot of different things that are happening in that data table. Text messages probably is going to have a different relationship. So you're going to want to separate those into a separate value. Or if you're not really using much SMS text messaging, then exclude it as a variable altogether. There's also different types of messages in that data table. Deliver mailings are mailings from the institution through the deliver tool. Form communications, maybe you have a confirmation email or a email before the event happens, a reminder communication tied to the form. Ad hoc messages when you're on the student's Slate record and you're clicking on their email address to send them an email. These external messages, though, are ones that are going into your system. But if you're also attaching emails from high school counselors, parents to the student profile, those will kind of generically get captured into that click as well. So you can also add filters on if the message sender is the student email. This particular export, we're looking at messages from the last 30 days, which we're going to do a slightly different date formula. So instead of a date difference, we're actually going to add to a date in the increment of days, -30. So we're going to essentially subtract instead of adding. We're going to subtract 30 days from today's date. So if the message delivered was greater than or equals to 30 days ago, we're going to include that in our aggregate count. And this might be more helpful in something like an engagement score or just a report to understand how students are actively engaging with your institution, which can more specifically be pulled with a filter like this, a export like this. So what if a student in the last 180 days sent us greater than or equal to 5 emails, but in the last 30 days, they've sent us 0. Maybe for staff assignments to like, oh, this student just completely went radio silent on us. Let's reach out to them. Let's try to get them back in the funnel, or find out what exactly happened. Maybe they got an email that spooked them. Maybe they got a financial aid award that like, oh, this does not cover everything that I thought it would, but maybe there's an opportunity for them to put it in an appeal and change that amount. So this is just really looking at how engagement can change throughout the cycle. We had the student who either was sending us a bunch of emails. If you have an engagement score, you could use that. If their engagement score is above a 70, but they haven't sent us any emails or haven't attended any events in the last 30 days, or they haven't called us, marked by an interaction, then we need to reach out to that student to see what's happening. It might be something simple. It might just be midterms and they forgot to hit submit on an application, whatever it could be. But that added touch of being able to identify these at-risk students is really important. There's also a way, there's not a great way to categorize your emails, but there is going to be a broad spectrum of emails and calls to actions in your emails. So if a student ignores this, hey, come visit us in Sunny's, California for a campus tour, if they ignore that, probably not the end of the world. But what about the emails that are, hey, you're missing items, or hey, you need to fill out your housing application, or you need to submit your I-20? There's these really, really critical emails and text messages that could be going out that if they are being ignored, can again be highly indicative if they intend to enroll. So we're looking at email clicks. So these are emails that we're sending to them through Deliver. The status is in click. So if we send the email, the status is sent. And if it gets skipped or if they're opted out, or if there's a complaint, it goes into one of those statuses. If they open the email, it goes into open. We have a lot of services like Apple's iPhone email client will open emails on their behalf. So open's not a great metric. But once they've clicked on a link, then the status actually goes to click. These are all mutually exclusive statuses. So we're just looking at emails that we've sent that have the status of click. So they've clicked on a link inside our email. In a deliver mailing, before decision to admit, we can remove that if we want. I wish there was a way to add more metadata to our deliver mailings. There's not, to the best of my knowledge, a way to associate a form to a mailing, to try to mirror in a data set mailing metadata is not super sustainable. But if you have a list of emails that you know are these are the really important emails that if a student's not interacting with or engaging with us, that's a red flag or that's a concern. Or maybe you have subfolders. So this is an event mailing, but it's in the critical subfolder. So as long as your staff members know to put these kinds of mailings in these special subfolders, you can track that. Or if you know that we put in the mailing name, so the deliver name, the word critical. So we're using a formula filter again. So no case whens, no thens or elses or ends. So when the message mailing name, so this is just the name of your deliver mailing, is like, and then we use the single apostrophe quotation. These percentage signs are again those wildcards. So it could be any characters before critical, it can be any characters after critical. So if any of our delivers have the word critical in it, or they fall into one of those folders, or they are in that specific list, then we're going to count how many times they either clicked it, or if we're looking at disengagement, so they're not clicking it, we can use the other statuses. So we're just looking at how are the students engaging with these really high impact emails. And that might be more indicative of if they intend to enroll than if they're just clicking on other emails that are not as relevant to them. And then we're going to go over these last two pretty quickly. So there may be the case where you're going to want to reverse code something. So like maybe at your institution, a 1 equals great, a 5 equals bad. When you're trying to then like explain how the model is likely to enroll, that can be kind of hard to explain because like as the score goes down, their likelihood to enroll goes up, but down actually means they got better. So you can use these case win formulas to, if they scored a 1, 2, or 3, give them a 2. If they scored a 4 or a 5, give them a 1. So we're reverse coding it. So the higher value equals better in this case, but we're also grouping our values. So maybe 1, 2s, and 3s all have a similar relationship with how likely they are to enroll. Same thing with 4s and 5s. The groups are about the same size. Formula actually start doing these kinds of calculations. When we look at our translation code, we can see that the actual value of the export is an A through F value, and the institution uses the translation code of A equals 1, B equals 2. I wouldn't do this kind of transformation in our translation code because this is very specific to this predictive model. It doesn't follow how the institution itself as an office interprets scores. So this translation code is probably used in several reports or queries, and these more specific project calculations should happen in that query, because someone might go into your translation code and be like, oh, this isn't how we code this. Or if you're changing the translation code to affect this one query, but you don't realize there's 3 other queries that also use that same logic, then we're causing really big issues. So again, we're going to use translation codes for those office standard procedures and these formulas to be very specific to our models. And we're just using our translation code, letter to number. For something like distance to campus, a lot of time, I mean, most students go to schools in their state. So we're not looking at stuff like that. There's vendors who will tell you students from this neighborhood tend to go in-state, out-of-state for their colleges. We're not looking at that level of nuance, but we're just looking at how far the student is from our institution. Might have, might have a relationship with how likely the student is to enroll or apply to you. So we're just looking at when the school is domestic. And we have our joins go from person to school, school to organization to address, because the school to address is just going to be the address on the student's profile, but this organization should be your institution's vetted addresses. So if that is in the United States, then we're going to give it a 1. So then we just look at the proximity and number of miles from your school to their school. If they don't go to a domestic school, then look at their permanent address. Else, it's just a 3,001 miles, which is essentially a proxy for international students. And we're just using that translation code to transform the number of miles into a 1 to 3 value here. So that's just a high-level overview of some feature engineering you can do in Slate configurable joins. So through this overview of actually building modeling, automating the process, and feature engineering, I hope that you really do have a much firmer footing and are ready for those next steps to actually build your predictive model that helps your office and your admission practices. We'll go much deeper on the actual building the model next month. And then using systems like SPS and Slate can really be easier to build and automate, and which makes it much easier to actually integrate into your daily practices and that overall strategy for your institution. This was the 5th of 6 workshops, so the next month is the very last workshop in this series. Would love to hear from you what kind of topics we should cover next year for these workshops. You can use this QR code to sign up for those workshops. You can get recordings for previous sessions. You can sign up for our Slate office hours. We kind of are trying to own that Wednesday at 11 a.m. slot. So the 2nd of October and the 16th of October, 1st and 3rd Wednesdays at 11 a.m. office hours. You can talk about these projects, anything Slate, anything Mission Office. I think we've been getting about 10 people per session. So those are really fun discussions to have. Conferences, I'll be at NACAC this weekend. You can drop me a note here at LinkedIn or that QR code to let me know that you're going to NACAC, and we should connect and chat for a bit. Yes, Robbie, those are Pacific time. So like I said, we had really fun name submissions from the community to name our Slate data miner. I've definitely settled on Clark J. Alexander, or CJ for short. This was submitted by Matt Herr. He's a senior consultant at SIG. So a lot of really great names. And one of the submissions I'm definitely saving for a later character that we're going to announce that I think works really well for it. But I would love to hear new names for our query climber. He is our little Scottish goat, which I think has a special part in my heart just because it matches my family tartan design very closely. And if you take this QR code, you can submit names, and you can actually see all 10 of our characters that we have built already. But yeah, I know we're getting close to the end, so if there's any questions, you can ask in the chat. You can hop up on stage and we can discuss, or if you want to go back over anything.
You know, David, we run these beehives all the time, and we have a lot of people that come and go. Your session continues to be the one that people just stay through the whole thing. So there is no like transient conversation. It's all people that are really interested in this topic, and they stay. So I appreciate that. So what is it that, what are some of the topics that they should be thinking about? We are moving into AI. We're starting to start mining different things. Like, I think even the Slate community is going to change, because AI is going to make us react different with all systems, whether it's SIS, your LMS, your CRM, Slate. You know, what are some of the topics that you feel that people should be thinking about? Because that's what I believe the next year is I call it the year of opportunity. The opportunity that AI is going to give us is going to give us something that we haven't seen before. And I've been in this market for 30 years, and I went from manual to a computer system. I've never seen the amount of change that we're seeing in the past 6 months around data analysis, all that stuff. And I think the Slate community is a little bit more on strategy than the rest of higher ed. That's just what I can see from when I'm talking to people. So I believe they might actually benefit from the AI side of it. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, and Slate's already kind of jumping on a lot of that AI functionality. They've had released for a while now. You can actually generate emails, at least in the ad hoc. Just like, hey, send an email to the student that touches on these maybe 5 topics. I'm really excited to see where stuff like that goes, because at the moment I really love building these really tailored these really tailored emails with content blocks and data. So maybe they tell us like, oh, I'm really interested in academics, or I'm really interested in extracurriculars while being on campus. So we can pre-craft what these email contents look like and really deliver a campaign that is very targeted to what the student is actually interested in. And maybe it's not them telling us. Maybe it's them saying, oh yeah, I'm on ping for a half an hour on your academics page. Or maybe I'm coming from a community that tends to have high academic achievement. So there's so many different ways to either be implicitly told what the student wants to hear about, or passively understand like, okay, this is information that resonates with the student. And you can really create those artisanal experiences with things like content blocks and configurable joins. But I'm really excited once that kind of cost and computation goes down of just, okay, I want to improve enrollment. And you can have an AI just generate, okay, this is what the student's demographics and behaviors look like. This is what's going to resonate with them, and create that mailing. Same thing, you can use predictive modeling to look at like, oh, I should be more strategic on what colleges or high school visits I do, or what names I buy from vendors. But we start looking at how AI can look at the models, look at what your goals are, look at where you're on track for, and make those and prompt even those recommendations based on like, oh, okay, if you tweak these, you're more likely to hit your goal because you have these 7 predictive models looking at how students are behaving in your cycle. So I think AI has will have such a foundational impact and transformation of how policies are able to be built, the time it takes to build those kinds of things. And
Yeah,
I think
we're just going to be a more nimble community in the next year. And I think the folks that see it, recognize it, leverage it, I think Slate will it'll pour gasoline on the things that I think a lot of the community wants to do. But and you're a little techie, right? As much as you're a little techie, I'm a little functional, and I'm like, I think I could use AI to be, to do the stuff that you're doing, and I think that could be the next set of opportunity. Did you see the question that Jonathan had here? It's more on the filter.
Let me share my screen again. Yeah, so I'm joining from, there we go. I'm joining from the person to the person login table. I think I've just renamed it inside just so, yeah, it's the person login table from the person, um, just for that particular portal. And I tend to rename my joins just so I know like, oh, okay, if I'm adding filters to it to know like, oh, okay, this is the join, but this is what I'm specifically doing to my join. Like I did the same thing when I'm connecting my school addresses. I'm connecting person to school, school to organizations. I'm actually renaming that to just school to organizations, not just a school by rank overall / organization.
There you go.
Help.
Jonathan gave you a little bit more nuggets to give out, yeah, right away. So a little more nuggets. It's kind of good.
Yeah. So yeah, I just when you start getting into more complicated configurable joins, and if you don't give them different names, they show up in the same table for when you're pulling your exports and filters. So renaming your configurable joins definitely is very helpful and highly recommended.
All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour almost, and want to say thank you for everyone joining. Be there next month for our next session in the workshop. Follow us on the Beehive. We have so many different topics that is really changing higher ed. We're really pushing the envelope. If you're coming to EDUCAUSE, come and find us at the Beyond booth, and maybe we could strike up a conversation on what's happening in the future. So. David, thank you as always, and we'll see the rest of you in the next session or at EDUCAUSE.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, love seeing everybody at these workshops. Hopefully see folks at NACAC as well, and have a wonderful week.
Yes.